We are mass poisoning all of our children and our adults.
The fact that Big Pharma have killed millions of people, literally, with their drugs, millions.
The second culprit is toxic chemicals in our food, our medicine, in our environment. Pesticides, food additives, pharmaceutical drugs, and toxic waste permeate every cell of our bodies.
Keir Starmer should have said, you can't fix the NHS until you fix the food.
Second, we need to change incentives in our healthcare system. And third, we need to inspire Americans to get healthy again.
Complete psychopath, Steve. Anything that comes from the pharmaceutical industry, don't believe a word of it.
I was so motivated when I heard the speech from RFK. I've never come across a politician that understands metabolic health so well. And his message about the big pharmaceutical companies and how often they do as much harm as they do good, I thought needed to be investigated further. Then my good friend Aseem Malhotra came to me and said, I've got an idea for a movie. We're going to make this amazing film. Will you back it? And I went, absolutely. What I'm going to share with you in this episode is how big pharmaceutical companies, yes, while at times they're helpful, are they making us and helping us live longer? Or, in fact, are they part of the problem that we've got with so much ill health?
2/3 of American adults and children suffer from chronic health issues. 50 years ago, that number was less than 1%. So we've gone from 1% to 66%. In America, 74% of Americans are now overweight or obese, and 50% of our children. 120 years ago, when somebody was obese, they were sent to the circus. There were case reports done about them. Obesity was almost unknown. In Japan, the childhood obesity rate is 3%, compared to 50% a year. Half of Americans have pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes. When my uncle was president and I was a boy, juvenile diabetes was effectively non-existent. A typical pediatrician would see one case of diabetes during his entire career, a 40 or 50-year career. Today, 1 out of every 3 kids who walks through his office door is diabetic or pre-diabetic. And the mitochondrial disorder that caused diabetes, also causing Alzheimer's, which is now classified as diabetes. And it's costing this country more than our military budget every year. There's been an explosion of neurological illnesses that I never saw as a kid: ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, Tourette's syndrome, narcolepsy, ASD, Asperger's, autism. In the year 2000, the autism rate was 1 in 1,500. Now autism rates in kids are 1 in 36, according to CDC nationally. Nobody's talking about this. 1 in every 22 kids in California has autism. And this is a crisis that 77% of our kids are too disabled to serve in the United States military. What is happening to our country? And why isn't this in the headlines every single day? In my generation, 70-year-old men, the autism rates are about 1 in 10,000. In my kids' generation, 1 in 34. I'll repeat, in California, 1 in 22. Why are we letting this happen? Why are we allowing this to happen to our children? These are the most precious assets that we have in this country. How can we let this happen to them? About 18% of American teens now have fatty liver disease. That's like 1 out of every 5. That disease, when I was a kid, only affected late-stage alcoholics who were elderly. Cancer rates are skyrocketing in the young and the old. Young adult cancers are up 79%. 1 in 4 American women is on antidepressant medication. 40% of teens have a mental health diagnosis. And 15% of high schoolers are on Adderall, and 500,000 children on SSRIs. So what's causing this suffering? I'll name 2 culprits. The first and the worst is ultra-processed food. About 70% of American children's diet is ultra-processed. That means industrial manufactured in a factory. These foods consist primarily of processed sugar, ultra-processed grains, and seed oils. Laboratory scientists who many of them formerly worked for the cigarette industry, which purchased all the big food companies in the 1970s and 80s, deployed thousands of scientists to figure out new chemicals to make the food more addictive. And these ingredients didn't exist 100 years ago.
And this is a global issue. In the UK, the University College of London have just released figures showing that toddlers, 47% of the food they consume is ultra-processed food. And by the time they reach 7 years old in the UK, it goes up to 57%. So way over half the food our children are consuming come from ultra-processed foods. And we're getting sicker and sicker and sicker. Let's hear some more from RFK. And before we go to the clip, let me just say, I admire this man so much, somebody that has a real problem, a medical problem with his throat, to stand up and talk so passionately to get this message across. I really hope that his message starts to stick throughout the modern world.
The second culprit is toxic chemicals in our food, our medicine, in our environment. Pesticides, food additives, pharmaceutical drugs, and toxic waste permeate every cell of our bodies. The assault on our children's cells and hormones is unrelenting. To name just one problem, many of these chemicals increase estrogen. Because young children are ingesting so many of these hormone disruptors, America's puberty rate is now occurring at age 10 to 13, which is 6 years earlier than girls were reaching puberty in 1900. Breast cancer is also estrogen driven, and it now strikes 1 in 8 women. We are mass poisoning all of our children and our adults.
We're in this horrible, horrific situation. I'm sure your lives, virtually everybody's lives, are touched by cancer these days. And what we have to remember, what drives cancer, or let's say the only food that it thrives on, is glucose. And where do we get glucose from? Lots and lots of it stuffed into the ultra-processed foods. So it's really, really important. This tragedy that we're all experiencing today, a disease that wasn't really around 100 years ago, is now affecting 1 in 2 people, mostly driven by ultra-processed foods. And Stephen Hawking predicted that within 1,000 years, the human race would no longer be here. He was talking at the time more about nuclear bombs and talking about global warming. And I don't think that's what's going to wipe us out. If you listen to what RFK is saying, and what you're going to hear Dr. Aseem Malhotra saying in a moment, really, what probably is going to wipe us out is the food companies and the pharmaceutical companies.
Considering the grievous human cost of this tragic epidemic of chronic disease, it seems almost crass to mention the damage it does to our economy. But I'll say, it is crippling the nation's finances. When my uncle was president, our country spent $0 on chronic disease. Today, government healthcare spending is almost all for chronic disease. And it's double the military budget. And it is the fastest growing budget item in the federal budget. And chronic disease costs more to the economy as a whole, costs at least $4 trillion, 5 times our military budget. And that's a 20% drag on everything we do and everything we aspire to.
It costs us £181 billion to fund the NHS each year at the moment, of which I've calculated, and all the workings out are in my book, 145 billion of that relates to ultra-processed foods, insulin resistance, and sugar dysregulation within the body. So this is a massive concern, and if numbers sort of fly over your head a little bit, look at it another way. 8 out of 10 hospital beds in the UK are occupied with somebody that has a dysregulation of sugar.
70 or 77% of school lunches are processed foods. There's no vegetables. There's nothing that you would want to eat. The same food industry lobbied to make sure that nearly all agricultural subsidies go to commodity crops that are the feedstock of processed food industry. These policies are destroying small farms, and they're destroying our soils. We give about, I think, 8 times as much in subsidies to tobacco than we do to fruits and vegetables. It makes no sense. If we want a healthy country, the good news is that we can change all this. We can change it very, very quickly. America can get healthy again. To do that, we need to do 3 things. First, we need to root out the corruption in our health agencies. Second, we need to change incentives in our healthcare system. And third, we need to inspire Americans to get healthy again.
And we have to do the same in the UK. We have to find a way to support parents so that in the morning things like eggs and bacon are a cheaper option than the cereals. Because we know the cereals, the UPS, are driving all the illness. And when we look at the cost of the NHS and those 8 out of 10 beds occupied by people mainly driven by the UPF foods, if we can reduce that cost and put that saving back to our farmers, then all of a sudden the eggs, the bacon, the healthy breakfast need to cost less than the cereals. That segues us nicely into the second part of this episode. So Kennedy passionately talking about ultra-processed foods and the massive detrimental effect it's having on Americans. He also touched on big pharmaceutical companies. Before I take you and show you the introduction of Aseem Malhotra's movie, and before we have our sort of after-show chat, I want to introduce a friend of mine. He's another brilliant doctor, written loads and loads of books. He's got a book called Doctoring Data. And I'll take you to a podcast that I recorded with him a few years back, where we were talking about how drug companies influence the decision-making in doctor surgeries way beyond what you may imagine.
Yeah, but essentially they're supposed to look at the data and then decide, is this worth prescribing or not? And then you find, well, the last time they did the NICE guidelines, 8 out of the 10 people on the committee had conflicts of interest with the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
And they're not supposed to have any, but they did.
Yeah.
And then the data that they use...
Well, can I just expand on that for a second? Because in your book, Doctoring Data, the bit that just resonated most for me on that exact same subject, you said that so we talk a lot about cholesterol, and some people believe cholesterol causes heart disease. We'll talk about this in another show, whether it does or doesn't. But they said every time, if you could get the guidelines to reduce a little bit of what bad cholesterol should be, every time it reduces, it creates billions of revenue for the industry. And in the book, you talk about the panel of the 9 judges or medical professions that got together to say, yes, you need to lower it. With the exception of the chairman, the 9 people on the panel, every single one of those was funded by multiple different, or they were taking funds from multiple different drug manufacturers who manufacture statins. Yes. Isn't that frightening, though, that we keep getting told we've got to have lower and lower and lower cholesterol so they can sell more and more statins, and yet the people that made that decision in America, and we sadly follow in the UK normally, was a panel full of people funded by the drugs company. That's immoral, it's insane, it's ridiculous. Now you've had a bit of an insight from Kennedy and Dr. Malcolm Kendrick. Coming to London to the launch of a film by my good friend Dr. Aseem Malhotra called First Do No Pharm, as in pharmaceuticals. We'll go to Leicester Square, we'll see the red carpet, we'll interview some great people, and then afterwards we'll go backstage and talk to Aseem himself. Stephen Hawking predicted that us humans wouldn't be around in 1,000 years. And that's, when you think about it, is pretty horrific, because humans have been around for 2 million years, only 1,000 years to go. We're right at the end, according to Stephen Hawking. And I think convinced I've worked out how that's going to happen. Think about this. You go back 100 years ago, people were dying of tuberculosis, infectious diseases, and without put COVID on one side, we pretty much eradicated all of those. 100 years ago, virtually nobody had cancer. It was so rare. But today, we're told by cancer research, 1 in 2 people are going to get cancer that's alive. If you go back 100 years ago, virtually nobody had diabetes. There are now 1 billion people on the planet that have either got diabetes or pre-diabetes. In the UK, we've got 1 in 10 school children now with either a neurological or a disability, a physical disability. 1 in 10 children. We've got 54% of UK adults with a chronic illness, living with a chronic illness. Of people that are adult working age, almost a quarter of them now are incapable of going to work because of their diseases. So we're in a pretty poor place. We've got life expectancy dropping in the UK, and we've also got the amount of years that we're healthy radically dropping. So we're getting more and more sick people, not living as long. So Stephen Hawking was definitely right. There's 2 main things that are driving that. In my book I talk about the big food industry, how they're stripping out fibre, adding more chemicals, and are poisoning us basically with the food, and you can't get away from it. It's everywhere. Even when you think you're eating really clean, then there's pesticides and herbicides, and then even when you think you've gone completely organic, there's still things in the packaging that are causing problems. So it's really hard to be perfect these days. In fact, it's impossible living in the UK. You should do everything you can to try and eat as much real food, putting more fibre back into your diet as the antidote to sugar. But the other part of the equation to that is the pharmaceutical industry, because while the food industry are making us sick, the pharmaceutical industry are just masking those symptoms so that we can get by. Oh, we're getting really sick because of the food and we're eating too much. Oh, let's have a GLP-1. Oh, my cholesterol's slightly high. Oh, let's have a statin. Yeah, we're just masking symptoms. And while you're probably aware that I've backed some movies before around food and the big food industry, We're going tonight to the premiere in Leicester Square at the Odeon, where all the big premieres are, of a film that I've backed, financially backed, called First Do No Pharm, as in pharmaceuticals. Because with this model we've currently got, where you go to the doctors, they diagnose and then prescribe, diagnose and prescribe, we're not living any longer. We're living shorter. So the model just doesn't work. We've got to fix the food industry, and then we've got to stop masking all the symptoms with drugs. Instead, we've got to turn to lifestyles, changing in diet, and working out what's causing what's going wrong in the first place. But I'm delighted. I've not seen the film yet. I've been sort of backing them to this point, but it promises to be a great movie where they uncover a lot of truths about the pharmaceutical industry.
Very So I'd like to introduce my dear friend Aseem Malhotra.
Stephen Bennett and Health Results, Soma Breath, all of these people have contributed to help this happen today, so very, very thanks to them.
Between 2003 and 2016, fines imposed on large pharmaceutical companies for fraud and other illegal activities amounted to $33 billion.
You have to do something. We are considered acceptable collateral damage.
We're talking about many millions of people killed by research fraud in medical science.
Between 40 and 60,000 Americans died. So this is like approximately equal to the number of Americans who died in the Vietnam War, died from taking Vioxx.
We need to apply quite a big dose of skepticism to the medical literature. They know they might get $1 million, for example, for publishing the trial. And that, I don't really see how you can manage that as a conflict of interest.
You are going to be obliterated if you take on this position.
I effectively lost my job.
The thing you care about is, I don't want to lose my memory. I want to be able to do the things I normally do in life. That's what Alzheimer's robs you of.
The FDA is not going to protect doctors and the public and the insurers and Medicare from this deception about the clinical value of this drug.
If you knew, why didn't you do anything?
Patient began to verbalize feelings of killing other people, and then himself.
They are now out of control as an entity that is purely there to make money. A psychopathic entity.
Wow, what a movie that was. Makes you rethink medical advice, rethink drugs. Not saying all drugs are bad, but you have to look behind the research for each one and then make an informed decision whether it's right for you. Fella, what a film. Thank you for taking time as well to talk to us about it.
Yeah, no, blown away actually with the response, Steve. And, you know, this has been about a year and a half in the making. Donald O'Neill, who's my co-producer and the director of the movie, he was the brains behind the idea. He came to one of my lectures in South Africa and felt that my lecture was like a movie, and then he came up with the title First Do No Pharm, and
that's a play on words of what you doctors learn as
well,
GPs, isn't it?
It's the central core of medical ethics, really, is first do no harm with patients. But it was nice play on words to put the P in front of the H, and it's in many ways I think the movie, it's a reflection of my life's work.
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, I've got a belief that, and I've spoken about it, I've written about it, that, there was a place for medication, and there probably still is a place for medication. And certainly if you go about 80, 90 years ago, when we were mainly dealing with infectious diseases, then medication was amazing. But what we're dealing with today, are we not, and that certainly is the crux of the movie, we're trying to medicate lifestyle diseases, and and things that are caused by wrong diets, not moving enough, etc., etc. And really, you can't mitigate against a lot of these illnesses. So why don't you, talk about some of the findings that you reveal in the movie?
Yeah, I think the top line, I suppose, there's lots of new, interesting information for people, a lot of myth busting and reveals. But I think if I was to summarize the movie in one line, the theme of the movie, it's medical knowledge is under commercial control, but most doctors don't know that.
Yeah.
And what that means essentially is that our healthcare system and our medical practice is geared towards prescribing pills, which come, certainly for chronic disease management, come with marginal benefits and side effects, and simultaneously detracting from more meaningful lifestyle changes. So it's like, it's a lose-lose, if you like. It's not just it's a way that the drug industry have convinced people to take their pills and not alter their lifestyle, because if they alter their lifestyle, or they're advised in an evidence-based way to change their lifestyle, they'll get off the pills.
Yeah.
And that's not what the drug industry want.
I think in many ways, and I'm not knocking any doctors because most of my friends are doctors, but 5 years at med school is pretty much dedicated to diagnose and prescribe, diagnose and prescribe, diagnose and prescribe.
Yeah.
And we'll talk probably in another chat about how do we save the NHS, and the government now are saying, we've got to put prevention before treatment, but they're going to just treat their way out of prevention as well. So anyway, I'm going off at a tangent. Let's pick on one that you taught me years ago. Let's talk about the latest research on statins.
Yeah, so statins are a drug that have been prescribed for decades. It's estimated that they are prescribed to at least 200 million people worldwide, possibly even 1 billion.
Wow.
Right? And they are touted or sold as the sort of most effective miracle drug to prevent heart disease, to manage heart disease. And when I started my investigation into this, I did it from a background as being a jobbing doctor, practicing, trainee in cardiology, then became a consultant in the NHS, and was noticing over time, Steve, there was more pressure on the system, more obesity, we hadn't really curbed heart disease after the decline in smoking, which had a massive impact on reducing death rates. Mm-hmm. But heart disease itself was still very prevalent, still the biggest killer in the Western world, especially in European men, #1 killer. And I tried to understand, if these drugs are so effective and so many people are taking them, why have we not curbed heart disease?
Sure.
All right. And when I went down, looked into that, and then started looking at the data and looking at it in its entirety and understanding the limitations of the research process and the way that drug industry have manipulated medical research, I ultimately came to the conclusion that, and I can obviously elaborate on this, but statins have a very, very marginal benefit at most, come with side effects that are quite common, that are quality of life limiting, but also simultaneously for many patients, if not most of them, give them the illusion of protection.
Sure.
In other words, in fact, there was a study actually that showed this to be the case in JAMA Internal Medicine many years ago, where they followed up middle-aged people, and they looked at who had the same sort of starting weight, same age, and they looked at ones who were on statins versus the ones that weren't on statins, and the one on statins actually gained more weight. And it basically, it gives people this idea that, okay, I'm on a statin, I can go and eat McDonald's or whatever else.
It's like a false protection, isn't it? That is the danger,
Yeah.
isn't it? Take this pill, don't change your lifestyle, which is actually what's driving most of the problems, but take this pill, you'll be fine. So that false safety net that really isn't a safety
false sense
net
of security, absolutely. Yeah. And then to break it down, so what does that mean for when we're talking about marginal benefits? The way that the drug industry have manipulated, it's not just about the way that they conduct clinical trials, which they control the data on. They design the trials, they decide who's in it, who's not in it. They then have their people who are authors in the trial, either paid by the drug industry or academics who are, their institutions are funded by them, to basically analyze the data and then produce results. And then even the results themselves are manipulated to make the drug look better than it is. So,
and the side effects look less harmful.
Absolutely.
They're allowed, this all shocks most people I talk to, they're allowed to mix absolute risk with, so in other words,
relative risk.
With relative risk.
Yeah.
So you can make the side effects look a lot lower than they are, the benefits much higher than they are, by mixing the two in the same report.
Yeah. In fact, there was there was an analysis done of the BMJ, JAMA, and the Lancet, 3 big medical journals between 2004 2006, and a third of those journal articles on drugs had something called mismatch framing. So it presented the benefit of the drug in relative risk terms, and we'll explain that in a second, and the harm in absolute risk terms. So what does that mean? So if you take a trial, a randomized trial, where you're trying to look at the benefit of a particular intervention or a drug, and in one group, say 100 people are followed up and they take the dummy pill, and in the other group, 100 people that are kind of clones of the first group, if you like, to make sure everything's matched, they take the statin. And over a 5-year period, let's say out of the 100 people on the dummy pill, 2 of them had a heart attack.
Yep.
And of the 100 people on the statin, only 1 of them had a heart attack.
Yep.
Right? So the relative risk reduction is 50%. You've reduced the risk by 50%.
Yes.
You know, because it's 1 over 2 times 100, right?
Yes.
So 50%, if you like, relative risk reduction. And but you've only actually prevented 1 heart attack from treating 100 people. So you treat 100 people to prevent 1 heart attack, and that means the absolute risk reduction is 1%, 1 in 100.
Yes,
and
so you've got to take that drug for 5 years, every single day for 5 years, and the statistics say it saves 1 in 2 heart attacks, but actually it's 1 in 100.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
1 in 100. And patients are not told that, and actually that is a more honest way for individuals to understand what the benefit of that drug is.
Yeah.
And when patients are told that, they think, hold on a minute, doc, that doesn't sound that good. And most of them actually decide they don't want to take the pill. And that's even before you talk about side effects. Is there anything else I can do?
Yeah, and even most doctors don't know this. In fact, I was talking to Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, and he said he's asked over the years about 500 doctors the difference between absolute risk and relative risk. And most doctors don't even know. So if most doctors don't know, and yet when they're talking about the side effects, they use one that says, oh yeah, it's only, what do they say, something like 15%. I can't remember the exact way around, but basically it makes the risk look a lot less, the side effects, but the benefit much greater.
Yeah, so what they might do in the trials, and then when they report the results, is they report the results as a relative risk reduction or benefit. So you're 50% less likely to get a heart attack, 50% benefit, and the harms in absolute risk terms. So let's say the harm is 1 in 100, they'll say 1%, and it makes it look like the benefits are way bigger than the harms.
Yeah. And of course, what we're learning a lot over the last couple of years is, back to LDL cholesterol, there's actually 2 types of LDL cholesterol, pattern A, pattern B. And it seems, and tell me, you know, whether this is what you've seen or not, but it seems that any lowering of LDL with statins is actually approaching the wrong type of LDL.
Well, I think, to be honest, the statin issue and benefit of statin, even that 1% benefit, which actually is the actual figure. So people listening, if you've not had a heart attack or stroke, or not diagnosed with severe coronary artery disease, your benefit from taking statin at best is 1%. And that's from data that's not been independently verified. In the movie, we walk people through this, so they're going to be blown away when they see all this stuff and how the statin research has been manipulated. But the way that statins work are actually from their other properties, which are not up through lowering LDL, which they do anyway. It's through their anti-inflammatory and anti-clotting.
Yep.
And that's probably where they get the benefit from. And the reason I say this, Steve, is when you look at all of the other trials where they've lowered LDL, there's no relationship with lowering LDL and preventing heart attacks. So lowering LDL is essentially a waste of time.
Yeah. So you're saying there is a 1% benefit, but it isn't in the way that we think it works.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And when you start to say 1% rather than reading the newspaper headline that says 1 in 2, you then probably want to be looking at some lifestyle changes.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the major issue, because we've got this massive pandemic of chronic disease, chronic metabolic disease, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, risk factors for heart disease, insulin resistance, which is synonymous with poor metabolic health, is probably the second most common cause of cancer after smoking. So tackling insulin resistance and improving metabolic health is going to be the solution moving forward, not just for preventing these diseases, but improving people's quality of life as well, because they won't need the pills, of course, which give side effects.
Yeah, I mean, in my book, and talking to Dr. Ben Bickman in my book, I've got the tree of insulin resistance now, which actually Swiss Re have copied.
I love that
which
tree.
says it's right. You know what I mean?
It's brilliant.
So everything from PCOS to erectile dysfunction to gout, to then certain cancers, like you say, diabetes, obesity, depression, anxiety, bipolar disease. You just go on and on and on, and you can link them, Alzheimer's, you can link them all to elevated insulin, and elevated insulin in the main, we're looking at diet.
Absolutely, 100%. Absolutely.
And you could also argue that nearly all of those, then if they relate to insulin, getting your insulin down by getting your blood sugar down is going to be better than any pill you can pop.
100%. You know, and none of the drugs per se, what they want, the drug industry want to do is get you taking as many pills for as long as possible. So if they could, you know, I debated the CEO of AstraZeneca a few years ago in the Cambridge University Union. And the motion that AstraZeneca put forward was we need more new drugs, which in essence means we need more people taking more pills because that's a business model. And I said this a few years ago. I said, listen, if we're not careful, there's going to be a narrative coming out saying we should give it to kids and even babies. And only recently there was a story in the Mail saying that give 15-year-old kids statins to slash heart attacks. That's what they want to do ideally. If they could, not only would they get guidance suggesting that you should take statins or give it to your baby, give it to kids or babies, they would manipulate the law, Steve. This is also what they do. This is a part of the problem. People need to understand that. To mandate it. If your child isn't on statin, they can't go to school.
It's frightening.
That's the next step. And people may think it's crazy, but that is the business model. If they could, they would.
If they could, they would. And if they don't get you with a statin, then you put a bit of weight on, and then rather than change your diet, let's just inject you with a GLP-1. It's frightening. And in another podcast, again with Ben Bittman, we start to uncover all the side effects, and it's just horrific. So the movie's out. It's fantastic. We've covered statins, obviously GLP-1s. But the thing that fascinated me, it's going off the subject of pills now, was this news, and it's the first time I've ever heard it, correct me if I'm wrong, but that actually we can reverse some heart disease conditions where in the past, the narrowing the arteries, we thought that was it with that medication.
Yeah, so, I published a paper in 2017 in the British Journal of Sports Medicine with two other cardiologists, both editors of medical journals, actually. I think for years people have thought that heart disease, the furring of the arteries, is a chronic progressive disease, it's irreversible, it's fixed, but we know that's not true. Although most cardiologists will not know this, and certainly every doctor won't know this pretty much, that actually those blockages can be reversed and they can be reduced. And there's data from different studies, but the most interesting data from my perspective actually comes from India. And in the movie, as you've seen, we go to India and we look at the angiograms of patients that have undergone a lifestyle change, advised by this amazing cardiologist called Satish Gupta, and he's been doing it for decades, not taking statins, of course. And what they found is that a combination of lifestyle factors, but in particular stress reduction through a form of meditation, was the way that they managed to reduce blockages from, say, 70% to 50% or 50 to 30. And the reason for that, Steve, is that chronic stress, which a lot of us are affected by, drives heart disease through mechanisms of increasing inflammation in the body and increasing clotting factors. And there are separate data to prove that. So once people get on top of that, this dynamic process of the arteries, these plaques building up, starts to go in the right direction.
And that's really encouraging. And again, that's why, one pill for every ill, we have to be really careful, because once you start popping, if you don't make the lifestyle changes, the best you're doing is maintaining where you're at that point. And you're saying here that now the evidence is showing we can actually reverse these things, which is just such good news.
It's mind-blowing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely, just phenomenal. I think the caveat to add to that, though, I think, Steve, is important, just to being a good scientist. So the first thing, and the reason we showed this in the film, is to show that this is possible. Now, the best way to do that, we still haven't determined, and it needs better trials and more data. But the fact that it's happening means that something is clearly, obvious. And all the logical evidence points to the fact it's a combination of lifestyle, for sure. Which means healthy diet, it means keep moving, not being sedentary. And perhaps one of the most important is reducing stress. But it's beyond just reducing stress and meditation. It's, what they do in India with these patients is almost like a spiritual transformation. He would get these patients in once they're diagnosed with heart disease, and they'd stay in this center, this ashram, for 7 days, bring family members in. What's driving the anger? What's going on here? They really get to the roots of it. So a lot of these people even broke their addictions to alcohol and stuff like that because they went on this spiritual journey, and their mindset is different. And that's just unbelievable. And of course, that's really good for their mental health as well.
Yeah, and we're learning, aren't we, more and more now that you can't separate mental health from the body. And the more doctors I speak to, they say, you know, a good place to start with most, what we'd say in the past, neurological conditions, whether that be, you know, Alzheimer's, bipolar disease, you know, even anxiety, depression, start to approach it from a metabolic point of view in the first place.
Yeah.
And you start to learn that the body and the mind, you can't separate
100%. Absolutely correct. You know, what I would say is you can't optimize your mental health without optimizing your physical health.
Yes.
And you can't optimize your physical health without optimizing your mental health.
Yeah, they're totally intertwined. So the movie's out. What's the end game? I guess, of course, you know, you always speak from the heart, and you know, all doctors have that great intention of helping as many people as possible. You know, where do you hope you see this movie go?
Yeah, I mean, really, we want to do even better than the last film that I did with Donal O'Neill called The Big Fat Fix, which you remember, which was based upon the origins of the Mediterranean diet and busting myths about saturated fat, for example. And that film premiered in the UK Parliament, and it had a big influence on introducing the sugary drinks tax, and I was named as one of the lead, if not the lead campaigner behind the sugar awareness stuff. So with this, we want to create awareness, but we also want to hit the policymakers who have control over the laws that have allowed Big Pharma to have all this power that is, you know, actually encroaching on democracy and our freedoms, because they are getting away with manipulating information. That's not acceptable. So one of the key things that should emerge from this, Steve, is that although drug industry can develop new drugs, I think given their track record and their history, and you know, we've got Peter Wilmshurst, as you've seen in the documentary, talking about the fact that Big Pharma have killed millions of people, literally, with their drugs, millions over the years, that we should ensure that every drug that they produce, they are not testing them themselves. They need to be independently evaluated, and then, listen, if they've done what it says on the tin, if they think it's so good, why are they worried about it being independently evaluated?
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. And let's, you know, put the record straight, and people won't realise this, you know, over medication and wrong medication are still, or not still, are now in the top 5 causes of death.
Yeah.
In the modern world.
Yeah, prescribed medications.
It's not as straightforward as everybody thinks it is.
Because of avoidable side effects. And they're avoidable because patients are not told. And doctors, in fact, not that. It's not because doctors are well-intentioned. Doctors, I think, don't realise the information they're using to make clinical decisions has been biased and corrupted. And that's one of the things that movie does, for sure. But what it also does is it shows exactly the thing that you've been very passionate about for many years, Steve, is about that if you change your lifestyle and optimise your metabolic health, it's a win-win.
Yeah, you know, I tell this story quite a lot. I remember being a young kid on the beach in Devon. Dad, late 20s, foot up with gout. And then a few years later, when I was 14, I remember him telling me, he said, oh, I've just got this tablet stuck in my neck and I've got a stiff throat, which turned out to be Viagra, which he thought was funny at the time. That's when I learned about, well, let's get off the subject, but I was 14 years old. And then Dad got medication for high blood pressure. And it wasn't until he was 81 that he got diagnosed with diabetes. Well, if you come back to what we were talking about earlier on, the tree of insulin resistance, all of these are early signs. Gout, high blood pressure, erectile dysfunction, they're all pre-warning signs that you've got a problem with insulin and insulin resistance. But of course, what the answer for every single one of those was a different medication for each one. And yet the underlying problem was the fact that his body had a dysregulation with sugar. So actually, all he had to do, right back in his 20s, was get a different relationship with sugar. But then, of course, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, you take this one pill, then that one pill, then that one pill. Now you're on 11 medications, and now you're getting side effects from this combination that probably you're the only person in the UK that's got those 11 that you're taking. So you're chasing. It's that poem, isn't it? It swallowed the fly to catch the spider, swallowed the spider to catch the... You keep going down this rabbit hole of more medication, more medication, more medication. And then another good friend of yours and mine, Dr. David Unwin, he said nothing gives him more pleasure as a GP these days as deprescribing. You know, if you can get a bit more time with the individual and explain that actually you can have the medication, or really what we want to do is make this lifestyle intervention, deprescribing may be the way going forward to help a lot of people.
Yeah, so for me, I mean, for years I've been doing this, but And actually, I learnt it. It's interesting. I was trained. I think I was very lucky to go to a really good traditional critical thinking medical school. And one of my first, which is Edinburgh, and one of my earlier jobs as a senior house officer, so that means a year after I've qualified and been working, was in care of the elderly. And they had a hospital in Edinburgh called Liberton, and it was a specialised care of the elderly hospital. So, of course, I know that older people, that maybe the term's changing, but that was basically if you're over 65, you end up in this hospital. And what I learned from the consultants there as a junior doctor was, and what I witnessed, and I thought, wow, is that a lot of the patients coming in, and in fact, up to a fifth of them who are older patients coming into hospital were admitted because of dangerous drug interactions. So one of the things we would do is we'd take people off pills. They'd have funny electrolyte disturbances, or there'd be an old lady that's fallen because she'd been over-medicated on blood pressure pills, for example. So I learned very early on about the importance of that. So for me, also, with everything I know about statins, whenever a patient presents with a new symptom, and I saw this in the NHS consistently, the first thing should be, could this be a side effect of the drugs they're on? That should be the default.
Yeah, especially if they're already on a
multitude
dish of tablets.
Of course.
I sat with my mum. She sadly can't talk now. Her dementia's so bad. But before it got that bad, we sat, and I'd got my pill drawer, but every single one, of course, is a supplement, and she's got her pill drawer. And we had this massive debate, which they were all medication, this massive debate with my dad going, well, it's just the same. You're taking 11 tablets, your mum's taking 11 tablets. I'm like, no, I'm taking 11 nutrition because I haven't yet got a problem, and she's taking these 11. And do we know really which one's doing what? Sitting down, my mum and dad, they don't know what they're taking. I haven't got a clue. They can't remember why they were taking them.
Yeah.
And the trouble in some ways is they've been the same GP for such a long time that nobody's critically looked at it and gone, well, can we de-prescribe some of these?
I know.
It's a real mess. And how do we change it? Because again, my understanding is we go to med school, 5 years at med school, it's diagnosed, prescribed. Where's the training on preventing things from going wrong?
Yeah.
How do we change this landscape?
I mean, this is the issue with the NHS, isn't it, Steve, to be honest, at the moment? One of the major issues, I think. So I think if I was to diagnose the problem in medicine, and the problems are also structural, they're societal, which we'll talk about. I mean, on that briefly, your biological state is a result of social and environmental factors.
Agreed, yeah.
Okay? The guru on this research is Sir Michael Marmot, and it's called the social determinants of health. So what does that mean? The conditions in which we are born, grow, live, work, and age, and the drivers of those conditions. So even a lot of stuff that determines disease later on starts even in childhood. Maternal stress can affect the kid, all that kind of stuff. A lot of chronic childhood stress can start influence epigenetic factors that will lead, but then exacerbated by lifestyle, of course. All of it kind of interacts. So I think people need to understand that. But when it comes to the medical profession, we don't want to throw the baby out of the bathwater here. I think doctors are very good at treating acute diseases, right?
Yep.
Acute illnesses, and there are a lot of life-saving procedures that are done, and antibiotics for infections and pneumonia, for example. And
very good at accidents. I mean, we
RTAs,
can rebuild
stuff,
bodies today and all 100%. Those sorts of things.
And doctors are trained, as you said earlier, as being excellent diagnosticians, right? And that's what a lot of them pride themselves on, making a diagnosis. But there are 3 major limitations beyond that, which don't allow them to maximize their potential to be the best doctors for their patients. Mm-hmm. So the first one is this. They can diagnose disease, but they're not good at root cause. We're not taught about root cause. Yep. It is what it is. Yep. Organ systems are all separate. It's not a mind and body relationship. Mm-hmm. Okay. The second part is we're not taught anything about nutrition or lifestyle.
Yep.
Right? And how that can manage chronic disease. And the third issue, which comes back to earlier conversation, is doctors are not very good at diagnosing what patients really want. In other words, true informed consent and understanding the research to be able to communicate that.
Yeah.
So those are the 3 major limitations in healthcare.
I'll add a fourth.
Go on.
And that is, it's difficult in 5 or 10 minutes when somebody's just walked in to, even if you are one of the new younger doctors that start to realise this bigger picture, how on earth in 10 minutes do you diagnose what I'm doing wrong with what I'm eating, how am I living?
100%.
That 10-minute, diagnose, prescribe at the moment.
Yeah.
If we can have a 10-minute model.
Yeah. You need more time. You're absolutely right. And I think on top of that, Steve, as well, because a lot of these things are cultural and structural, that's why for me, for example, it's about education, but it's also about creating environments where everyone can flourish.
Yeah.
Right. And that means we look at the food environment, we've got ultra processed foods that have become unavoidable. Right. And it's like education in this sense is in many ways is almost a waste of time. It's like asking a child who grows up in a sweet shop not eat sweets.
Yes. Yeah.
You've got to also create a healthy environment. And it's not about banning stuff. Of course, things like that are going to happen when something's very, very bad for you and toxic. And maybe my personal view is that certain things should be banned. But at the end of the day, that doesn't tend to work because it drives stuff underground. I think it's just making the default choice a healthy choice. And if people want to still have their junk food and their sweet, they can still get it. But it isn't just the default, like easy, so like in your face kind of thing. One of the things I learned and I wrote about very early on when I started campaigning about hospital food is that, there are somebody from Unilever met me at I think it was a conference, and he said to me, Aseem, Coca-Cola's motto was to make their product available to anyone, anywhere, and any time. Even a bedbound patient in a hospital who couldn't go to the tuck shop would have it. Contracts that were created between the hospitals and these big companies that they would have to deliver on a cart crisps, sugary drinks, and chocolate bars. Think about that.
Yeah.
And what that does is, in the mindset of the patient also, and this has been shown in studies, if you have junk food sold in hospitals, it increases the acceptability of those foods. So therefore, it's fine. And a lot of doctors and nurses as well.
Yeah.
They go, no, you can eat what you like, what's right. It's about calories and don't eat too much. Complete bullshit, pardon my language.
Yeah, my dad collapsed August last year, and he came round in hospital, and they bring the food trolley round, and there wasn't a single, type 2 diabetic, and I spent years trying to educate him what he should be eating, shouldn't be eating, with his condition. He came round, there wasn't a single option on the trolley that wasn't high in carbohydrates. Not one.
Or ultra-processed or whatever.
All completely ultra-processed.
Yeah,
Ice
exactly.
cream.
So what do you expect people to do?
Ice cream for pudding.
Well, you know what's so sinister about these companies, and they've been diagnosed as psychopathic, and that's from the preeminent expert in psychopathology, Robert Hare, who says, I'm not talking about individuals here, by the way. I've met some of these guys, and I'm sure they're very nice people with their families.
Systematic.
But it's a system issue that they're pathologically self-interested when it comes to making money for their companies. And
what
it's
they
also
do is a legal issue. That's the problem today.
But they've manipulated the law for their purposes, for themselves, right? That's what they do. But the thing is, what makes it so sinister is they have then also simultaneously pushed the narrative. They're the ones behind it's about calorie counting. It's not about, no food is bad. That's what they have pushed. It's about exercise and not about diet. It's all come from them. It's that sinister. Not only that, it's even worse than that, Steve. This is what big tobacco used to do as well. When they know their product is harmful from internal research, they will then go out of the way to market it as being the opposite.
Yeah, and look,
smoking's good for asthma, for example. I mean, this is it sounds mental. Doesn't
smoke
it?
a camel. The doctors were saying smoke a camel.
No, but this is how psychopathic these institutions are. They need to be completely reformed.
Yeah, and what a lot of people don't realise is that when the cigarette companies started to lose the war, what did they do? They went and bought all the big food companies. Kraft was owned by Philip Morris.
Yeah. And then they manipulate the food to make it addictive.
Well, exactly. So let's take the learning of cigarettes to make them addictive into Oreos.
So what they do is make it addictive. Addiction is the opposite of free will, and simultaneously pushes the narrative it's your fault.
Yeah, absolutely. And keep saying
complete psychopath, Steve.
Yeah.
Everyone needs to say that straight away. You think about big food, big pharma companies, first word that should come into their mind, and then we know we're winning, and that's one of the things I want to come out from the documentary. The first word that should come into their mind is psychopath.
Yeah, and I'll add another thing there. Look, if you are a director of a publicly listed company where there are shares being sold to people that buy and invest in companies, your only legal obligation is maximise shareholder investment. And if you then go out your way to make your products more healthy and sales start to drop, you've actually gone against your legal requirements.
So the law needs to change to encourage,
exactly.
to say your requirement should be to produce a product that is beneficial for society.
Exactly.
Otherwise, fuck off, basically.
So there's a new type of corporation called a B corporation. Right. And if you invest your money in B corporations, then their number one rule is to, almost like your doctors, first do no harm.
Yeah.
Bring out products that are healthy, that have environmental benefits, have individual benefits, and then secondly, get a good return on investment for the shareholders. That's a B corporation.
Absolutely.
But when people start to realise that there are these things, I think that's when And people start saying, I'm not going to invest in a normal corporation because I know they're not looking after the interests of the consumer and the planet.
And Steve, I've got no issue with people making money doing the right thing. It's people making the money through mass deception and wrong thing. Essentially, it's legalized fraud. That's what it is.
Yeah. And you made a really good point. Then they put the blame back on you. Yeah. And that's the problem I have with things like Weight Watchers and Slimming World, and their fundamental underlying ethos about what you can and can't eat is so wrong that then and it just doesn't work, and you lose a little bit, but then you put it back on. Oh, it's your fault for not following the plan. No, the plan doesn't work.
yeah, absolutely.
Have more carbs. No, it's terrible.
It's madness. I think for people like us that have been in this for a long time and understand it in depth, it's madness, isn't it?
Yeah. So the film is out. Hopefully people start to listen. I want to bring that conversation then into literally it came out in the newspapers yesterday, where the new Prime Minister has said one of the 3 ways we're going to fix the NHS is to start to put prevention as a key cornerstone of the NHS. And we're like, yeah, fantastic. That's what we've been telling everybody for the last few years. You can't keep letting people get sick. We call it the National Health Service. It's really the National Hospital Service, the National Sickness Service, whatever you want to call it. Yes, we've got to put prevention ahead of cure, but I'm worried because when I think prevention and you think prevention, we think, let's get people just being more healthy, understanding food, learning from food, moving more, all those sorts of things that we know will prevent it. I'm slightly worried that the government will end up just issuing even more tablets saying, well, they're preventative medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. So really good point. And I think prevention isn't just part of the solution. I mean, prevention is also the cure. It's not prevention is better than cure. Prevention is the cure.
Yeah.
And that's also because we know the reversibility of the actual preventative strategies in managing these diseases. So, but yes, you're absolutely right. The drug industry will see that as an opportunity to change the narrative, saying that prevention is get your kids on statins.
Yeah.
And drug people up as much as possible. And we must stop that.
Yeah.
And the way we stop that is just by truth, by transparency, by giving people the full information, telling them that the data's, they're only hearing half the truth about the benefits and harms, etc. And I think that's the way forward.
Absolutely. I've been doing a lot of research on GLP-1s, and I know somebody that's taking it, and for that one person, he's an engineer. It seems to be doing okay. And he's got a strategy once he gets to his target weight to come off it and what he's going to do, and it all makes sense for him. He's that sort of engineering sort of brain. But everywhere I turn at the moment, it seems to be the solution to weight loss, obesity, type 2 diabetes.
Heart disease.
And yet, when I speak to the Ben Bickmans of this world and other doctors, it's like it's causing, paralysis of the intestines, it's causing depression, anxiety, suicide. People feel sick and nausea, people losing their interest in food completely. What's going on?
I'll just start from the beginning again. Catherine DeAngelis, the former editor of JAMA, said, anything that comes from the pharmaceutical industry, don't believe a word of it.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got this issue with this drug that they've touting all these things, can't believe anything written in the newspapers, can't believe the medical journals, none of the data has been independently analysed. And then you start putting them in the real world and you're getting all these problems with paralysis of the stomach and all sorts of horrific side effects. Again, it's not the right mindset to help solve the population's problems. And again, if there are some benefits, they're going to be marginal. So I think, again, it's another hoax in the sense that I'll rephrase that. I think it's just like any other drug. We don't really know the true benefits and harms. And I think it may have a role for a very small minority of people, but that doesn't make the drug industry money. They want to expand the use of their drug to everybody if they can, when it might just have an overall benefit versus harm ratio in a small minority of people. Maybe someone who is morbidly obese and tried everything under the sun and need to get the weight down and need a kickstart, maybe for those people, but not for everybody.
And I think you're right. The more I've studied it, a kickstart. And there are people that are, severely diabetic type 2 that maybe to kickstart it while they're learning the education about what is that GLP-1 doing. It's slowing gastric emptying. How can we do that naturally? More fibre in the diet.
But the drug industry will do everything to convince people that they need to be on it for as long as possible because they want people to keep taking these drugs. That's how they make their money.
Yeah, and they're hide behind the fact that call it Ozempic, call it whatever, what a brand name you want. But, it's a GLP-1. GLP-1 is a natural hormone. And then they're saying, well, it's natural. Yeah, but, the body produces the amount it actually needs. You're now giving it in doses 4 times more, 5 times more.
And also I understand, listen, I'm not an expert on Ozempic, but from what I've read, it is reducing, one of the ways that it loses weight isn't about losing body fat. It actually you lose a significant amount of muscle mass too.
Indeed, that
is not healthy. That's not a good thing.
Yeah, well, everything we read, isn't it? One of the most important things for longevity is to keep your muscle mass, because as we age, falling is one of the biggest causes of death. So you need to keep your muscle mass, and yet this does seem to be wasting a lot of muscle as well. And my big concern is, at the moment, as far as I understand, it might have changed, but the NHS, you can get it if you're in this certain bracket on the NHS, but they're saying it's a 2-year programme. So in that 2-year programme, you're going to lose some weight, but you're going to slow your metabolism right down because of what it does with slowing down gastric emptying. You're eating less food. But the second you come off it, you can now have a low metabolism. You're going to go back to eating what you were eating before.
And then you go back on it again.
You're going to be heavier than when you even started. So we're just kicking that problem down the line.
Completely. Absolute madness.
So that's the GLP-1s. Talk about statins. What else can we learn in the movie?
Yeah, I think we can learn about the fact that everybody needs to step up a little bit more. I think one of the problems that's happened, Steve, over the years is because of this so-called corporate capture of public health, a lot of the medical institutions have also moved away from really prioritizing patients first, and whether they know it or not, they're all puppets of the drug industry, and I've been a victim of that myself. And part of the story and the narrative of the movie is showing that journey of me just being a doctor who wants to help his patients, and that isn't easy. There's a line that I've used in lectures before. We've got an epidemic of misinformed doctors and misinformed and unwittingly harmed patients, and honest doctors can no longer practice honest medicine. So it's hard.
Yeah.
If you're an individual, it's harder, but as a group, and more people are aware, more people come out of the woodwork and support, and it's much harder to attack a group. And I think the medical profession really needs to take a really good look in the mirror and stop the drug industry manipulating them.
Yeah, look, and in some ways, people have got to understand, the NHS is 75 years old, and people say we're living longer. Well, actually, we're not. So I read some research a couple of years ago, and we checked it out, and it's absolutely legit. If you took so there's an article out there, a bit of research by a guy called Roboth, English research, and he said that people born that were male, that were already adults in the 1870s had a longer life expectancy in 1870 to today. And everybody goes, no, that's rubbish research. He was right. When you look at the numbers, yes, life expectancy was way shorter back then. On average, because 1 in 5 died in child mortality. We're not talking about women, because a lot of women died in childbirth.
Yeah, 1 in 5.
But if you were a male and you were an adult already in 1870, in a period where there was over-farming, so every class had access to good quality food, you lived longer than you do today. Well, how can that be when we've got this brilliant NHS, when we don't die from accidents anymore, because you guys are all great at fixing people, where we don't die from chronic diseases, very rarely, because you guys are brilliant at fixing with drugs there, but we're not living any longer. So the pharmaceutical model cannot be working.
Yeah, in fact, so the actual data here, interestingly, is since 2010, last 14 years, life expectancy has stalled, and there are more people with chronic disease, so we're getting sicker, that's for sure.
Yep.
In America, it's even worse. They've lost 2 to 3 years off of life expectancy even before the pandemic. So they're ahead of us in terms of how bad the situation is there. So yeah, this commercialization of health is what's happened, has been an absolute disaster.
Yeah, I mean, in America there's many, many reasons. I mean, first of all, their food system rules are shocking compared to ours. I mean, sitting here recording this in your lounge, opposite you've got Planet Organic. In America, I could write organic on food even if it was grown with pesticides and herbicides. I mean, it's just, it's a nightmare.
Again, that's legal manipulation, isn't it?
It is indeed. So we're quite lucky in the UK that our food standards are slightly better. But we've got to keep looking at this pharmaceutical model, because it is not making us live any longer, and we're getting sicker and sicker.
Absolutely. And it's time for people to wake up. And I think with the movie, that's what hopefully will get a lot of people with a ripple effect. We've got a screening shortly. Also, we're having a screening in the US their parliament, Capitol Hill. And I'm spending a few weeks, promoting the film across the US, very US-centric as well, as you know. And we want this to be, it's a global issue. The more people that see it, the more people that can stand up, really, and say, not anymore, we're not going to accept this anymore.
I think the timing's really good. Your movie's brilliant. The whole message about, at first, Do No Pharm, at the same time as literally a new Prime Minister stands up and goes, right, we're going to have to change the NHS. It is broken. They've admitted it's broken. And one of their pillars is to put prevention as one of their main pillars moving forward. Let's make sure then, together, that prevention model isn't a pharmaceutical prevention model. It's actually what we know, which is make sure we're changing lifestyles and make people more aware of food.
Absolutely, 100%. You can't fix the NHS until you fix the food. That's what he should have said. Not about prevention.
Yeah.
Keir Starmer should have said, you can't fix the NHS until you fix the food.
Yeah, you could say, you can't fix NHS till you fix food. Or you could say, you can't fix NHS till people stop being sick. And you can't stop people being sick until you fix food.
Of course.
I mean, that's
100%.
You can't keep, I do a lot of sailing. And when a boat starts to get holes, you can keep putting plasters on. It's going to sink.
Yeah.
What you've got to do is get in a new boat.
Yeah.
And we've got to get in a complete new boat.
Yeah.
And it's got to be fueled properly.
100%. Great,
well done, fella.
Great analogy.
Great movie. Can't wait for everybody to watch it.
Thank you so much.